Good evening. With a note from Jeanette, we are ready to start tonight's meeting. I'd like to call to order the November 20th, 2014 regularly scheduled meeting of the Santa Barbara Harbor Commissioners. Jeanette, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Betsy Kramer. Here. Stephen McIntosh.
Here.
Dennis Power. Here. Helene Webb. Here. And Corey Bantelin may make it in late.
Good, very good. We have a full agenda tonight. Mr. Reedman, any changes?
Mr. Chair, no changes tonight.
Very good. This is the time for public comment on anything that is not on the agenda, and we do have a comment. Mr. Sean Hastings, would you like to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Harbor Commissioners, Harbor staff. Sean Hastings, not representing the Channel Island National Marine Sanctuary this evening, actually representing the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management at UC Santa Barbara. And just wanted to bring to your attention that this evening there's a number of graduate students in the Coast and Ocean Policy course. These are second-year students. They're soon to graduate, and they are aspiring policymakers in the ocean and coastal realm. You offer a local policy forum, so we thought we'd come and visit this evening and just listen and learn.
Thank you, and you and your students are most welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is it for public comment. I'll close that now. We move to the approval of the minutes. I would take a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any one abstention? Commissioner Sloan, thank you. That moves us to the department update. Mr. Reedman, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. The LCP Committee, consisting of Commissioners Sloan, Webb, and McIntosh, met with the Waterfront Department staff and Planning Division staff on November 11th to discuss the process for reviewing and providing comments on the draft Local Coastal Program update, the LCP update. Planning staff distributed a draft of a couple of chapters of the draft LCP to us. We went through it, and planning will complete and distribute to Waterfront staff and the LCP committee a draft of three more chapters towards the end of December or in the next few weeks. Planning's asked the LCP committee to reconvene in January to review the comments on the existing policies and consider staff and committee members' comments on additional policies for these sections. So these will be policies that we're carrying over from the old Harbor Master Plan, and then other ones that are no longer valid, and we'll be deleting them. Upon completion of the effort, planning staff will update the sections as appropriate and then bring them to the full advisory boards, including the Harbor Commission, Parks Commission, and Planning Commission for their review and approval. And then planning staff expects preparation and review of the remaining sections of the LCP to continue in a similar manner for several sections, one under review at a time. Moving on, in terms of chartering and business activity permits, as reported at the October Harbor Commission meeting, there are currently 2 kayak excursion operators permitted under the BAP policy. That's Captain Jack's Tours and Santa Barbara Adventure Company. The permit allows the operator to conduct guided kayak tours. It does not allow rental of water sports equipment or kayaks. Recently, it was brought to the attention of the Waterfront Department that Santa Barbara Adventure Company had been running guided SUP tours, stand-up paddleboard tours, during 2013 and 2014, and staff notified Santa Barbara Adventure Company to stop, which they did. In October, Michael Cohen, the owner of Santa Barbara Adventure Company, requested that staff amend its existing kayak excursion permit by adding stand-up paddleboard excursions, guided excursions, to the existing kayak excursion permit. Staff denied the request due to concerns with the proliferation of stand-up paddleboards in the launch ramp area. Staff has scheduled a meeting of the BAP Chartering Committee, that's Commissioners Spicer, Kramer, and Bantelin, on December 16th to review the request. And we've notified Mr. Cohen of that. Michael Cohen and I met a week or two ago to discuss his issues, and he's also sent an email to all of you, which you've all received and reviewed. So he's also here tonight to speak to the item. But before that, we'll just wrap up with 4th of July and Parade of Lights fireworks displays. Bay Fireworks produced the fireworks displays for the July 4th and Parade of Lights events in 2012, 13, and 14. During the July 4th, 2013 and 2014 shows, several malfunctions occurred, causing delays, gaps in the show, and misfires. Staff issued a request for proposal in September and received proposals from 3 companies: Bay Fireworks again, Pyro Spectaculars, who we've had before, and Garden State Fireworks. Staff ranked the proposals, and based on the criteria that was used, Garden State Fireworks was determined to be the most responsive to the RFP and the city's needs. And some of their recent productions include Washington, D.C. National Mall on July 4th of last year and the year before, 2014 Super Bowl, long-term contract with Walt Disney World in Florida, and so forth. The contract is for calendar year 2015 with 4 one-year options to extend at the city's discretion. The cost of the 4th of July show is $50,000, and the Parade of Lights is $5,000, and that funding is included in the fiscal year 2015 Waterfront Department operating budget. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Reedman? Okay, well then at this time, Mr. Cohen, I know you've put in a request to speak. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Thank you for hearing me. My name is Michael Cohen. I operate Santa Barbara Adventure Company. Been in business for 16 years. We're the largest outfitter in town, taking over 10,000 people a year on guided tours. We have a permit at the Channel Islands National Park, state beaches, and our BAP at the harbor, which is a great permit. Had that since 2001. And we don't do any rentals, only guided tours. The reason I'm here tonight in front of you all is to bring up the issue of the language of the BAP, which prohibits my business from offering SUP tours. And in the eyes of the industry, I wanted to stress that the paddle sports industry is really seeing kayaking and SUP as very similar, a variation. In fact, there are hybrid kayak SUPs that are on the market right now. There's over 5 of them. And so it's interchangeable paddle sport. So I had no idea we were doing anything wrong, and when I was notified by the Harbor Department, I obviously stopped, and I did have a long conversation with Scott. He was very open to my arguments and persuasive discussion about the different activities, and we really want to just try to see if we can get an amendment to the existing BAP to change the language to paddle sports, which would generically cover both kayaking and SUP. In my opinion, it really is just you could call kayaking sit-down paddling, if you like. We service a whole large range of clients. In fact, we take school groups as well as we take school groups and outdoor education programs out. And these are a high-risk group that people need to have a guided service. And if we were limited, not able to provide guided kayaking, we do sea cave kayaking as well, guided SUP tours, we would actually be forcing these groups to do rentals. So we often have advanced needs, such as the Wounded Warrior comes with us, or again, these school groups, or even we do a lot of travelers and tourists who have English as a second language. And they really need a guide service. The main complaint from the harbor, I realize, is that it's the traffic for SUP, and I would just want to stress to this panel that, a guided tour really is a safe tour where we have certified instructors that are trained, that carry rescue equipment, including radios, and we are, if anything, we're crowd control. We're keeping our guests out of the traffic lanes. We're helping other people if necessary. We have had cases where we've aided private boaters or rentals. So guided kayaking is not part of the problem of this congestion down there. And I just wanted to let you know that Scott and I have had a very amicable conversation. I'm really looking forward to this subcommittee meeting that's coming up in December, and I hope to give you all some more information about that. And my goal really is to just change one word on the permit from kayaking to paddle sports. And thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Are there any questions I can answer?
I appreciate that there may be questions, but I'd like this to go to the subcommittee for the full dialogue as opposed to a question and answer tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I also believe we have a late edition that would also like to speak. And I apologize, I can't quite read it, but Garrett, did you want to come up and speak?
Thank you. Just wanted to represent one of the companies already as a leasee in the harbor, as a paddleboard and a kayak renter and instructor. We are an ASI instructed school, which is the Academy of Surfing Instructors. We were recently certified. They're an international board. They work with Australia mainly because in Australia, in order to teach stand-up paddleboarding, you have to have a professional certification. We're actually one of two on the coast of California that have this certification. What we would like to preserve is our leasees' obligation and our right to be able to provide this service and not to have more competition in our area. And I know it's probably also a concern of the harbor because the thoroughfares and the channels are already being congested with enough paddleboards, kayaks, and other boaters to add more people coming into this. It usually defers into one of the lessees' obligations to somehow mitigate this problem somehow. So adding more people to this situation is probably going to fall onto our laps, and that concerns us. So our opinion is to allow it as it is. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
What company are you with?
Channel Islands Outfitters. We're at Paddle Sports Center next to Brophy's there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Excuse me. Okay, any questions for Mr. Reedman before we move on to the item number 3? Okay,
When is that meeting scheduled?
that is scheduled for December 16th, 4 p.m. where is it at, Scott?
Mr. Chair, it's in the Marine Center classroom at 125 Harbor Way above the Mail Center. It's not in our office. It's in the building next door.
All are welcome. Thank you. Moving on to Business Services Report, Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm happy to be here this evening to present November's Business Services Report. And the first item I have for discussion is something that doesn't come up very often in the harbor or the waterfront, and that is available lease space. For the first time in over 3 years, lease space has recently become available in the harbor. As was reported to the Harbor Commission recently, Transpac, the former business located there, decided to close its doors in August after decades of service to the harbor and the community. A request for proposals was released yesterday for the 490 square foot commercial space seen up on the screen. Again, it's 117G Harbor Way. To the left, just to help you find your bearings, to the left would be On the Alley, and to the right, there's a breezeway, and then Sushi Go-Go is located adjacent to that. Per the municipal code and the harbor master plan, as far as uses go, priority will be given to ocean-dependent uses, then ocean-related uses, and then visitor-serving uses in that priority level. All the important details regarding the request for proposals are listed on the Waterfront Department's webpage. And I should let you know that, and for all those folks out there, that the proposals are due Monday, January 19th of 2015. This is a great opportunity to lease space in the harbor. Again, these opportunities do not come up very regularly. It's usually when somebody gets a lease in the harbor, they're there for as long as they can possibly be there. So again, great opportunity. It's a well-situated space that sees a great deal of pedestrian traffic on a daily basis. Following the submittal deadline, again, January 19th, 2015, the Harbor Commission's Proposal Review Committee will convene to discuss all the proposals and to move forward from there. So we'll keep you all apprised as to the activities as far as that RFP is concerned and the proposals that are submitted. So please, if you are interested or know somebody who's interested, check out the Waterfront Department's webpage. The next item I have is the Stearns Wharf Christmas tree. For the 7th consecutive year, the Waterfront Department is working with the Stearns Wharf Business Association to bring a 25-foot Christmas tree to the shoreward finger of the wharf. So that'll be adjacent to the the Museum of Natural History's Sea Center. Now, the Stearns Wharf Business Association has graciously and paid for the white fir. And it will be delivered this coming Monday, the 24th, and it'll be installed using a crane, and it'll be decorated from there. And the tree will be on display until the first week of January. So come on down to the wharf and check it out, as well as all the other Christmas lights up down on the wharf, as well as in the harbor area. And the final item I have for you this evening is our fall season report on cruise ships. Cruise ships by the numbers. This year, and every year, actually twice a year, and after the spring season and after the fall season, we come and give you a brief report on the status of the cruise ships and revenue generated and things like that. This fall, we have received 10 cruise ships. We have one more, and that'll be next week, and then it will be wrapped up for the fall season. Again, cruise ships come in our shoulder seasons. That's generally not a very busy time for local businesses, so it comes in the spring, generally January, February, March, and then again in the fall, late September, October, and November. And that's really helped out the business community, both downtown as well as in the waterfront. As I've told you before, it's very much a great deal of collaboration goes on to put on these cruise ships to bring them in. We are not obviously a port city or your standard port city, so it takes a whole lot of effort to get people from the ship to the shore. And we work very closely with downtown Santa Barbara, the Chamber of Commerce, Visit Santa Barbara, and the Chamber and a whole host of other organizations to make that happen. So again, this year, including next week's visit, we will have had 11 cruise ship visits. And that includes about 43,277 people. And I should clarify that just about 30,000, almost 31,000 of those are passengers, and another 12,000 are crew members. So when I talk about visitors, I generally just use the passengers as the visitors. So about 31,000 people came ashore, roughly. Our gross revenue is about $216,000, as you can see up on the overhead here. We then pay a number of groups to help us out. One of those is our booster shuttle fees. We have to add to the regular service of MTD to help move those people around. It's a very organized process. We're constantly getting comments from visitors as well as the cruise lines. They love it. We've had many people say that this is their favorite stop out of all the stops. We pay for four extra booster shuttles, and then we also have 3 regular shuttles and 1 downtown shuttle. And those are rotating every 10 minutes all through the day. They usually start about 8 or 9, and they're here to about 4 or 5. So that's our booster shuttle fees, a total of $46,676. We then have the MTD waterfront shuttle fees at $38,472. We have public works permit fees, and that's to have access to the right-of-way. We do have to block off a lane for safety, and we cone that off and work with public works to make that happen. And then that's about $3,100. And then we have miscellaneous fees, things that pop up throughout the season. Generally goes for downtown Santa Barbara and Chamber of Commerce staff fees. They usually have one person there staffed all day. Uniforms, supplies, expenses, as well as signage. So once we take all of those out, our estimated net revenue is about $124,000. And you'll see that's a little different than what was in your report that was issued last week. The administrative analyst, Dominique Samario, and myself were able to dig down a little deeper as we got more revenue figures in. and it worked out for the good. This is a higher net revenue than what was in your report. So as far as this calendar year season, next Friday will be the last one. Looking out towards the spring of 2015, we anticipate 15 ships coming to Santa Barbara for visits. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bossy. Any questions?
Chair, if I may, I'd like to first just recognize Councilmember Hotchkiss, who's in the audience tonight. He advocated for an increase in cruise ships to our harbor, to our coastline, and he had the vision and the foresight to bring in that extra revenue to the waterfront department. Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to ask staff if at 11 ships this fall and 15 in the spring, are we at capacity, or could we bring in more ships?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, I don't think we've determined a capacity. We did have more ships last calendar year. I believe we had about this total would be about 26. I believe last year we had a little over 30. And that seemed to go okay. It's really dependent on how they're spaced, as well as cruise ships' desire to be here. They do change their routes on a regular basis, and I've said in the past, it's a fickle industry. They pick and choose as they see fit. So I think capacity is in the minds of whoever's making the decisions. And so far, it's been a good source of revenue for not only the waterfront department, but on a bigger scale, downtown businesses and the city as a whole, especially in the shoulder seasons. But it seems to be something, when we're varying between the 25 and 30 mark, that seems to be palatable from the citizens of Santa Barbara as well, which we want to be cognizant of.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it's important also to point out, I think, more than just our net impact or positive upside of $125,000, there's a local economy that benefits. Has the waterfront partnered with someone, or is there an organization that's calculating those numbers for the larger economy?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, yes. We haven't partnered with, but Visit Santa Barbara has tallied that number because the downtown businesses are very much in favor of the cruise ships. This brings a tremendous amount of foot traffic into downtown. As I said, just in these 11 visits, that's 30,000, almost 31,000 people that probably wouldn't have been here had these ships not shown up. And again, the idea is that they come up, they show up just for the day. They generally don't stay the night on the ship out off the coast. They move on. But the idea is to plant the idea of Santa Barbara in their heads. They see that as a place they want to come back to, and they come back. So it's lining it up for the future. They have done some studies. I'm not sure how scientific they are, but the idea is that there were a couple of them. One of the studies said per couple spends about nearly $300 per port they visit, and it varies from there. So there are a number of ways to slice that up, but downtown businesses estimate that it's in the millions of dollars that people are spending here from these cruise ships for a calendar year, obviously, visiting shops, restaurants, and things like that.
That's fantastic. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Kramer.
Thanks, Brian, for your report. I was wondering, on the net revenue to the waterfront department, that doesn't include any staff time, I notice. Is there a way of figuring that out, how much staff is dedicated to this?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kramer, that's a great question. We do have staff time. A lot of it involves parking with the initial setup, but again, after the setup, and they're already at work for the day. So this is just another activity that they're doing for that. There may be a few hours of overtime here or there. And also our administrative analyst, Dominique Samario, plays a big role with these cruise ships and works with them throughout the day in their visits. So she's out at the site quite a bit. But again, she would already be at work as well. So it kind of cancels itself out. But if the commission was wanting to, we could go back and figure it. We do have it down as much as we can to a science. It varies a little bit, and we learn new things every year. But we've got it down pretty well now. So we're very efficient as far as setup in the morning with the cones and things like that. as our parking staff, and then they can, for the most part, leave for the rest of the day, come back towards the end, but it's a new shift, pick it all up, and move on.
I appreciate that, and I think it might be helpful in the future for the end of the year to, next year to list staff time and as a net revenue. Thank you again for the report.
Commissioner Power.
Thank you, Brian. A quick question on the lease, and I wonder if you could tell briefly a little bit of the department's thinking behind why the preference for ocean-dependent and ocean-related services opposed to general retail, restaurant, nonprofit use, whatever other general visitor services there might be.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, those priorities come straight from the Harbor Master Plan as well as Santa Barbara's municipal code. The harbor, as you know, is a working harbor, and it's meant to stay a working harbor, and that a lot of other harbors don't have that anymore. And so we are very fixed on keeping it a working harbor, and so that's how the priorities fall, again, with the municipal code as well as the Harbor Master Plan. Ocean-dependent, your fishermen, things like that, ocean-related, things that need the ocean for the business to survive. A good example would be paddle sports. They need the ocean for their rentals and things like that, or there wouldn't be much of a business there. And then visitor serving is very important. There's make no buts about it. That is a very important part of the harbor, and that's our restaurants and our retail, which are great businesses. But again, that's the way the priorities are set up. Does that mean that it will be a restaurant, it will be an ocean dependent? That depends on the responses we get. Obviously, that changes with each space that's available.
Yes, I certainly wasn't challenging the logic.
Oh, no.
I was just wondering if the municipal code has any quantitative measures, like amount of square feet of space you have to have for ocean-dependent, ocean-related, for example, to keep it a working harbor, or is this pretty much the judgment, which is sound always, of the department? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, no, that's a great point, and I didn't think you were challenging it. And a good point about your statement is that in the RFP itself, we do have that section of the municipal code as an attachment, so they can read through that and kind of get an idea of where these priorities are coming from. A few months ago, I came to the Harbor Commission with a 5-year uses review that also went to the Planning Commission. And through that process, we do look every 5 years, we look at the different uses in the harbor, and are we still a working harbor? And through those reviews, both at the Harbor Commission as well as the Planning Commission, it was agreed upon that the decisions that are being made at the commission level as well as at the staff level are maintaining the Santa Barbara Harbor as a working harbor. So it's not so much a quantitative, and there is no quantitative data in the municipal code, for example, as far as square feet and things like that. It's, I guess the best way to put it is a feel and an understanding when you look around and see what's going on down at the harbor. So I hope that helps.
Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Brian, and I'm glad the cruise ships are so successful. I have, however, and this is probably more of a Harbor Patrol thing, received a lot of complaints from the BAPs on the speed that the tenders are going through the harbor. They're exceeding the 5-knot and the no-wake zone. And people working on their boats have been tossed about, and liveaboards or anyone. So I wonder if that could be addressed and reiterated to the captains when they come back. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Webb, I think I can address that. We've got some of the similar complaints either directly or forwarded to us. And hopefully you haven't heard that in the last month, or well, the ships have slowed down, but in the last number of visits, hopefully you hadn't heard that, because we had very direct and straightforward discussions with the management at Princess Cruises about this, and they assured us that the vessels would slow down, and our observations indicated that they had.
All right. Any others? Okay. Thank you, Brian. Well done. Real quick, when is that RFP due?
Mr. Chair, that RFP is due Monday, January 19th, 2015 at 3 p.m. And that is, 2 months away, and you think that's a lot of time, but we put it out so far because of the holidays, and really that gives you about a week. No, so January 19th, 2015.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to number 4, Mr. Triberg, the facilities report.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. Contrary to last year at this time, I'm pleased to report that dredging will begin in the next few weeks. They're geared up to start here a little bit after Thanksgiving, contrary to the staff report. They started mobilization today. That's uncovering all the pipes they've buried that are on West Beach and East Beach. Setting up the dredge yard's going to begin, and they'll start testing the dredge, make sure all the pumps are working properly. The discharge location is going to be in the vicinity of Calle Cesar Chavez. I need to go down a slide so you can have a picture of the dredge. And this is in the upcoast section, the farthest west of the area where they can discharge, and we've decided to resume discharging that location to nourish the beaches down coast. Many of you may remember last year on March 1st, we had one of the largest swells in years, and there was severe erosion of East Beach, especially after missing the fall cycle of dredging. So that's going to be starting probably the week, sometime next week after Thanksgiving. Otherwise, it's business as usual, and should be no problems. AIS Construction Company is the contractor working with the Corps of Engineers. They're in the middle of a 3-year contract. There's $2.38 million in the President's budget for this year. Unfortunately, the budget isn't adopted, but there is a continuing resolution, which is typically how the federal government does business. So there's adequate funds to be moving forward. As I mentioned, dredging is going to start probably the next December 1st and should be finished up by Christmas, and with no discernible changes from dredging that has occurred in the past. Funding is through an annual appropriation from Congress. And this year, or last year I should say, it was a little bit different. At the request of the Corps, they asked us to prepare an economic impact analysis of the waterfront and the harbor's operations. And this is on the heels of a couple of years ago when the Congress or the federal government did not appropriate any money for Ventura Harbor. It was the first time in probably a couple of decades where one of our local harbors, Channel Islands, Ventura, or Santa Barbara, hadn't had any funding at all. As a matter of fact, they had to dip into reserves to piggyback on some work that was done in Channel Islands to have any dredging done at all, and they kind of barely kept the mouth of the harbor open. Nevertheless, this report that they had prepared, the Corps folks felt it was very influential in convincing staff and the President's staff to go ahead and provide some funding for Ventura. So we went ahead with this effort. Next slide. We hired a firm called the California Economic Forecast. You may have heard of them. They've done lots of things locally regarding local economics and economic forecasting. As I mentioned, the format was exactly the same as what they did for Ventura. Next slide. In general, what the consultant did is they put together these different effects: direct effects, indirect effects, and induced effects of harbor operations on our local, state, and federal economy. Direct effects essentially are the number of businesses at the harbor, what's going on at the harbor, and the number of workers that are employed as a result of those businesses. And this is a little bit brief, and we can provide the report if you're interested in the details. But the consultant determined there's about $54 million in economic impact related to direct effects in the year 2013. Indirect effects are the result of businesses spending on organizations influenced by harbor activities, such as trucking and fish processing. Anybody who goes down to the harbor in the evening sees a half a dozen trucks, a couple dozen boats offloading, and the folks that are engaged in offloading that, most of that stuff goes down to Los Angeles and gets processed. Those are the indirect effects. And the consultant estimated those impacts at about $28 million in the year 2013. Induced effects are those considered by individuals that are spending their money that they earn at the harbor around the community. These create jobs elsewhere. Folks earn money in the harbor and they go and spend money in restaurants downtown and that kind of things. Those are considered induced effects. And our consultant determined there was about $45 million in benefits from that. Overall, next slide, they estimated there was about $125 million in direct, indirect, and induced effects from Santa Barbara Harbor. And this is just the harbor, excluding Stearns Wharf or any other activities in the waterfront. This compares to about $200 million for Ventura Harbor, and $125 million is enough to kind of get the attention of the federal government. This is a lot of economic impact that would be eliminated, essentially, if the harbor was closed. And the whole analysis is based on a harbor being closed and what would happen if that were the case, like it was last year, albeit briefly. Direct, indirect, and induced economic effects support about 1,075 jobs. That's a lot of people working.
And this, like I said, this is very influential for the federal government. The estimate is for about $154 million in these effects and 1,143 jobs by the year 2017. And I'm pleased to report that Channel Islands, Ventura, and Santa Barbara Harbor were included in the recent President's budget. And Scott and I have met with the Corps a little while ago, and they suggested it was a good idea to undertake this, and that it did influence the right people, and that it's not certain every year. It's an annual appropriation, but it certainly helps to go through this exercise. Thanks, Nick. Folks may have noticed a lot of activity on the beaches in Santa Barbara over the last few weeks, and these are related to a couple of sand berms that we construct every year. Sand berms are a very common occurrence in Southern California. They're used to protect critical coastal infrastructure from large storms and big waves. We have one berm at Ledbetter Beach. This berm is designed to protect the yacht club, its parking lot. They have a little boat yard there. The Harbor Marine Works, the big boat yard, also has some storage that's protected by this, and also our maintenance yard. The Barrow area is from just up coast. You can see some equipment way off in the distance, and it's trucked down. This year was a little bit of a unique year. We used these very large end dumps, kind of like the ultimate Tonka toys, and they're loaded from off-site, and the material is placed right on top of the sand. And it takes about 3 days to do this work. And what it does is, ideally, it doesn't change the beach profile at all. By just putting the sand on top of the existing beach profile, the natural erosive processes occur, and you really add some significant armoring. Last winter, on March 1st, we had a tremendous swell, and Scott and I were lucky enough to be out there during the height of it, and we actually watched some large waves overtop this berm. But the berm in general really dissipated the energy, and there wasn't any erosion and damage. There was some flooding, coastal flooding, which was kind of a problem, but they really did their job last year. Mission Creek is a little bit different. This berm kind of extends easterly from the wharf and goes across the south face of the Mission Creek Lagoon. And this berm is designed to keep flows from Mission Creek from turning west underneath the wharf. This happens periodically. It seems really odd. The creek must take about a 90-degree turn to get under the wharf, but it does it repeatedly. And when it does it, it can scour out the piles, and you could have some problems with the piles failing and the wharf collapsing. There's a second benefit to it. It causes, let me go back up. There's two different discharges. There's the Laguna Channel and Mission Creek itself. Both of these create their own little independent lagoon. There was a study a couple of years ago to manage a sensitive species called the tidewater goby, and it determined that having these two lagoons combined into one would really benefit that species and other sensitive species by creating a larger lagoon. So that's another secondary benefit from this. The Barrow site, we use the same material as we did, the same equipment as we did at Ledbetter Beach. The material is borrowed from a little bit down coast in an area where we would like to have the mouth open. When it opens naturally, we're not allowed to open the mouth of Mission Creek. It's been a bit of a contentious item in the city for several years, but by putting up this berm and borrowing from the desired location, we get the mouth to open, as you can kind of see where the end of the berm is. And we did have a little bit of rain this year, thank God, and sure enough, the mouth opened right where we hoped it would. Both of these berms have been very effective in countering the impacts from large ocean swells, and they've kind of served their purposes. The other thing is, these are considered soft coastal protection structures as opposed to seawalls or riprap, rock groins. And they're really acceptable to the California Coastal Commission. We have permits from the California Coastal Commission, and this is probably the wave of the future when we talk about coastal adaptation related to climate change and sea level rise. So you're going to see this is going to get a lot more attention. The cost of this is about $45,000 a year, and that's to put up both berms, take down the Ledbetter berm, and also do maintenance on the berms if they get washed away throughout the middle of the year. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Treiberg. Any questions? Commissioner Kramer.
Brief question. You mentioned helpful to the goby. How about to the steelhead? And any effects at all?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, the study was focused on tidewater goby, so it really didn't opine on whether or not it would help steelhead or not. I think in general it helps to have a larger lagoon than a smaller or two smaller lagoons, so it probably does help when they do actually combine together.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Power.
Thank you, Carl. On the matter of the economic impact analysis, which federal agency decides which harbors are included in the Corps' dredging budget, and are there any minima and for, say, the parameters that you reported on in terms of economic benefit? Are there any minima that have to be reached that you know about? Is it something that is of concern to the harbor? Have you ever faced conditions where you feel you might lose federal funding because you don't meet certain standards?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Power, the Office of Management and Budget is really who kind of prepares the budget, the president's budget. And when we used to have earmarks, which we don't have anymore, there was a lot more influence on the budgetary process by our local congressional representatives. Congresswoman Capps was really involved for years and years and years and instrumental in getting us funds. But without earmarks, Congress really isn't as influential as they used to be. So it's the Office of Management and Budget. They do take feedback and input from all the different agencies they represent, such as the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army and the Corps of Engineers. With respect to any sort of a threshold for which they would do maintenance dredging or not do maintenance dredging, they don't have that. But what they do have is they have a ranking criteria. They created a matrix, and a couple of years ago, Scott and I went down and met with the Corps and went over that. And within that matrix, you have economic impacts and other things such as coastal dependent uses, which I'm going to talk about in my next report a little bit, and how that influences their decision to fund the different harbors, be it Santa Barbara, Ventura, Morro Bay, down south, anywhere. So there isn't a threshold, which is probably a good thing because we're a pretty small harbor. We can't compete with L.A. Harbor or Oakland or any of those big places. Recreational harbors are probably at the low end of the priority, and we're sort of considered a recreational harbor. Therefore, things like managing the harbor as a working harbor helps us significantly rank higher. And we do work closely with them every year. Scott and I usually take a look at the ranking matrix and what we can provide to help influence them to provide funding for us.
So the OMB makes this decision on their own? They're not advised by, say, the Corps or some other agency that's closer to Santa Barbara and knows what's going on?
They are advised, I believe, by all the different agencies from which they get funding. The Corps itself puts together its own budget and makes their request. What they get back, I think the ultimate decision is, I believe, is done through OMB. So,
what agency do you have to be most concerned about? I mean, the OMB seems to be pretty far removed and would be making their decision based on judgment by another agency, but is it people you deal with here on the West Coast or?
Commissioner Power, we work directly with the LA district of the Corps of Engineers. You know, we want to make sure we're on their radar and that they want to do the work for us and that we're a priority within their district. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I have a quick follow-up from Commissioner Power's question. Does having a Coast Guard ship here help us with any of that ranking or where we fall in the OMB Corps budget?
Chair Spicer, it absolutely does. It's probably one of the highest priority operations we support.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Well done. We move on to item number 5, Harbor Operations. Mr. Cronman.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Last month we reported to you about a fairly dramatic offshore boat rescue, and we have a similar event to report to you again tonight. This time was even a little hairier, if you will. It was at night on October 25th when we got a call that a vessel some 9 miles southwest of the harbor was in danger and was sinking, and the seas were 3 to 5 feet, pretty choppy, and 2 officers headed out in Patrol Boat 2, again, the fastest boat in the fleet. And they got on scene in not too long a time, less than a half an hour. But by the time they got on scene, the vessel was sinking and or sunk, which it eventually did. And the 2 individuals who were on the boat had gotten into a very small rubber life raft. And thankfully, they had a portable VHF radio with them. And we took what's called a shot. We took a radio direction finder shot on them, and we drew. And the officers did a great job of doing a line of, a straight radio line of contact to the life raft, and both individuals were rescued. And I'm happy to report that it was a successful event. I met with one of the survivors, and he was very impressed with Harbor Patrol's work. We're proud of them too. Again, another great rescue back-to-back months is pretty unusual to have that happen unless we're in a stormy season, which we haven't seen in a while. And then on the heels of that, earlier this month, last week, in fact, we had a boat fire in the harbor, fairly unusual, but we had a 2-minute response to that. A vessel in Marina 2 their engine compartment caught fire, and when we got on scene, Supervisor Captain McCullough and Officer Halamachek got on scene. There was opened the engine hatch, and whitish gray smoke was spewing from the engine compartment, and they gave it a solid dose of dry chemical, which you can see here totally coated the engine department, but certainly put out the fire. It was glowing red and orange forward of the vessel's two engines, and ultimately fire investigators from the fire department determined it was an overheated battery charger, which actually was melted against the bulkhead by the time the officers got to it. But again, the woman who owns that boat was very thankful for the quick response from Harbor Patrol. 2 minutes is, in our book, a pretty rapid response. And still on the Harbor Patrol front, I wanted to introduce you to, I apologize here, our new Harbor Patrol officer, Jessica Gray, joined us on October 4th was her first day. She replaces, and it's hard to use the word replace, she follows in the heels of Sergeant Ed Stetson, who was with the Harbor Patrol for a remarkable run of 29 years. Ed was a relatively famous officer, was on several remarkable rescues and other contacts during his career. And Jessica is going to be a fine replacement. She's a wonderfully capable woman who brings a broad range of training and experience to patrol. She used to be Harbor Patrol crew. That's oftentimes where future Harbor Patrol officers get their feet wet, so to speak, as Harbor Patrol crew. And she's just started her job. She's immersed in training. She's doing a great job. And folks see her down on the docks. We would welcome them to say hi to Jessica. Her outside interests you may want to talk to her about include adventure sports and martial arts and those kind of things. But I hope you'll join me in welcoming Jessica to our department and to the waterfront community. And also switching gears to the commercial fishing front, or actually the marina management front, in November the department had the unthankful job of, or the thankless job, if you will, of terminating 2 slip permits. As those of you who have been on the commission for some time know, that slip permit terminations typically come in 2 categories. One is the non-payment category, if you will, and the other is what you could call the bad boy category or the criminal category. And we had to terminate 2 slips, both for criminal behavior. I don't think we need to go into the details of that, but the bottom line is the slip permits were terminated, and neither of the individuals who were the sole slip permittees, one in a 35-foot slip, the other in a 60-foot slip, decided to appeal that decision. And so, per Waterfront Department rules and the municipal code, because there are nobody listed in the 35-foot category or the 60-foot category on the waterfront's master waiting list, we defer to what's called the designated commercial fishing berth lottery. Both these vessels were in designated commercial fishing berths, unlike just the regular berths in the harbor. You've heard me once a year, or once every couple of years anyway, talk about our designated commercial fishing berths. So as a result, we're going to have a lottery to fill those slips. The lottery will begin, the eligibility window will begin tomorrow, and it will run through January 8th. Applications for the lottery will be accepted during that period, and a drawing will be conducted, and I apologize for the misprint in your staff report. We're correcting it online. Will be at the January meeting, which is going to be on the 22nd, not the 15th. And so we will draw 3 names. We believe the 35-foot slip is going to get a lot of attention. The heart of the eligibility criteria is that you have to be a commercial fisherman going in and demonstrate landings similar to, actually parallel and in accordance with the landings requirements applied to through the designated fishing berth policy. In other words, 2 years, $15,000 worth of earnings in the previous 2 years. So you can get to the lotteries via our website or contacting us at the Waterfront Department. And Jeanette, who is here tonight, will take those calls directly if folks have questions at 564-5519. Or, again, you can link to it from the Waterfront Department's website. There's an application there if folks want to apply for that lottery drawing. And finally, of course, it's the holidays, and I'm happy to announce that a lot of work is going into and what we expect to be a very successful Parade of Lights on December 14th. The theme is Gone Fishing for the Holidays. We already have some applications in. Of course, it always starts with the 3 p.m. Santa's Village on the Navy Pier. Santa, 10 tons of snow, kids, carolers, goodie bags, the whole deal, music. It's going to be elves. I don't want to forget the elves. And it's going to be a lot of fun then, of course, as it gets toward dark, folks start filtering over to the wharf for the parade, which starts at 5:30, usually concludes at about 6:30 or close to 7 o'clock, followed by a really fun awards party and after party at the Maritime Museum. And so we hope folks come out, or we hope boaters apply. There are forms available at the waterfront, the harbor market, and the fuel dock. So there's no shortage of forms, and we hope the public comes out in droves. Best viewing is usually from Stearns Wharf or the Breakwater, and so we're very much looking forward to this signature holiday event at the waterfront. And that would conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Croman. Any questions? All right. Well, Mick, thank you very much. Real quick, when are those lottery applications due for the commercial fishing slips?
For the first commercial fishing slip, it's a 35-footer for which we'll have that drawing in January. They are due. The window opens tomorrow and concludes on January 8th. And I apologize for not telling you the second window now, though I will repeat it next month. The second window for the 60-foot slip that'll be drawn at the March 19th Harbor Commission meeting, and applications for that lottery will be accepted from February 2nd through March 5th.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Sloan.
I just thought of it. Thank you, Mr. Cronman. I just had one question about the rescue offshore, and maybe you covered this last month. I wasn't at the meeting when you talked about the other one, but where was the Coast Guard during this rescue?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan. The Coast Guard typically, the Coast Guard helicopter did show up on this rescue, right about the time that the rescue itself was taking place. The Coast Guard was also involved in the last rescue, but they had a safe boat that came from Channel Islands Harbor that was involved in that rescue, but they got there a little after we did. We have a boat that goes close to 30 knots, and leaving Santa Barbara, we sometimes are just the quickest folks on scene. We're first responders, but the Coast Guard, in their capacity, were involved in both rescues.
Yeah, I commend the officers on a great job on both the fire and this, and it's comforting to know that they do go out and help out wherever they can, mid-channel like that. So it's good to know. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, it appears that Officer Halamachek had a busy month. So.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you. We are now moving on to new business. Jeanette, will you bring us up to speed on the first item?
Yes. Item 6, Marina 1 Replacement Project, Phase 5 Construction. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A receive a report on the Marina 1 Replacement Project, Phase 5 Construction. B, direct staff to reduce the F-finger expansion from 8 slips to 4 slips during Phase 7 of the project. And C, direct staff to continue to operate the end-tie at F-finger as lease space.
All right.
Mr. Chair,
Triberg,
Commissioners, good evening again. After a year off, we're going to resume construction with the Marina 1 replacement project, and it's brought up a couple issues, as you can understand from the recommendations. Tonight, I'll talk about a little bit about the pending construction of Phase 5, J and K fingers, and some issues related to F finger, the expansion of F finger, and the end tie lease. Starting off with construction, J and K fingers, Phase 5. We're going to start that off pretty soon. By way of background, Phase 1 was constructed in 2009 with a phase every year until 2012 when we finished Phase 4. We took last year off and we designed Phases 5 through 8 and went out to bid, and I reported in the spring when we received the bids from Bellingham Marine Industries, the same contractor that had constructed the previous docks. J and K fingers, the construction is scheduled to begin in January, right after the holidays. All of these projects are kind of the same. They have 3 main components: demolition, installation of the docks, and installation of utilities. Demolition is pretty straightforward. These docks were built back in the 70s, and they come apart pretty easy because they're kind of falling apart as they are right now. All of the material goes to Marburg for recycling, and everything that they can recycle, they do go ahead and recycle. Some of the stuff we reuse, but not very much. When it's all gone, all you see is a bunch of piles there. And one thing that isn't new are the piles. These are concrete piles that were driven back in the 1970s. They're very strong. We inspect all of them, and they're in great shape, and they really don't need to be replaced. It's a very, very significant and expensive component of any marina construction project, so you certainly don't want to replace them if you don't need to replace them. It does create a little bit of a challenge because the new docks, they need to fit in place because the piles are already there and everything's got to be measured very precisely. New docks arrive at the launch ramp. These come from City Dixon that's kind of near Sacramento, a little bit west of Sacramento, and they've done all the work for us in the past. Pretty straightforward. Takes probably less than a week to launch all the docks associated with one finger. We do K finger, then J finger, any single finger at a time. The utilities are a little bit more complicated than people realize in any marina system. During Phase 5, we replaced all the utility feed to the entire marina, and that's electrical, fresh water, and domestic water, and cable, for that matter. And when we did that, they did it in anticipation of all these future phases. So they kind of replaced the main trunk of the tree, and then they just add the branches. So it really facilitates these future phases and building out these phases. One relatively significant change is the electrical code changed, requiring that there's a transformer on every finger now. As you walk down Marina 1, there used to be just transformers down the main walk, but as we built these out, we put a transformer on each finger. It's a little bit disruptive. It takes up a little bit of space and then winds up going in front of certain boats, but we put these on dampeners and pad them, and we use the smallest cabinets and the smallest transformers necessary. So we've managed to kind of make that impact or that change not that noticeable. Once installation's complete, takes about 6 to 7 weeks for each finger, and we move all the folks back in. The construction schedule, as I mentioned, starts in January, should run through about mid-April. Vessel relocation plan is something we're put together right now. What's sort of unique about Santa Barbara Harbor when we do these kind of projects, we don't ask everybody to leave. In most other harbors, everybody's got to go away and fend for themselves with respect to finding berthing. When we do one finger at a time, there's up to maybe 50 or 60 boats, and we attempt to relocate those all within Santa Barbara Harbor. Both J and K fingers have a lot of boats on them. They're some of the largest fingers, so it might be a bit of a challenge, and we reserve the right to ask boats to raft up temporarily or even move to Ventura or Channel Islands Harbor. Fortunately, we haven't had to do that in the last 4 phases, and hopefully that'll be the case. I think it's much more convenient for people to just move within the harbor. We're going to contact the slip holders early next month and give them their slip assignments towards the latter part of the month and give them 5 days to move, and then we'll move right into construction. The contract that was bid upon by Bellingham Marine Industries includes 5, 6, 7, and 8, all the remaining phases. Phase 6 includes H and I fingers, Phase 7, E, F, and G fingers, and Phase 8, A, B, C, and D fingers. And those are all done 1 year apart, 1 year after another. We'll be finished with everything in 2018. Bellingham Marine Industries, they submitted a low bid of $4,215,000, and they've completed all their shop drawings for Phase 5. We're kind of undergoing that review right now. It should be done in another couple of weeks, and like I said, we'll be ready to start installation of the docks on the beginning of January. They also want to prepare the shop drawings for Phases 6 through 8, and they really want to do that so they can get approval before any codes change again, because that is a risk you run when you do a project that lasts like 10 years. The first half could be under one code, and the second half could be under another code. But that brings up some issues related to F finger and especially Phase 7, E, F, and G fingers. Because of that, they need some direction on how we're going to deal with F finger. There's some opportunities out there, and a couple of those we want to bring to your attention, and we're asking for recommendations from you this evening. The first off is expanding F finger. This used to be the dry dock lease area. Many folks remember the dry dock. It was there for over 30 years, since the early 70s, provided a very valuable service, an alternative to boaters for vessel maintenance. Unfortunately, was under the scrutiny of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and they had been monitoring it for years, and there were some issues with doing these kind of bottom scrubbing operations and painting operations over the water and some of the residue falling into the water. And a couple years ago, they actually closed it as a site that they were monitoring and investigating, with the understanding that this area would be covered with future docks. So when we went through the planning process back in 2006 and 7, we kind of knew that the dry dock wasn't going to be there forever. So we aimed high and decided that this would be a good opportunity to expand F-Finger and provide some new berthing, especially because we have a lengthy waiting list. We included in our plans the expansion by 8 slips. We went through the entire review process. We didn't do an in-depth analysis of navigation and maneuverability and other things. We kind of just went through all the typical things you go through when you obtain permits from the different regulatory agencies, and they were all approved. You can always make a project smaller. You can never make it bigger. So we, like I said, aimed high and got the maximum approval we could. But now that we really need to get down to it and decide if it's in the best interest of the harbor, we've done a little analysis, and we've overlaid the 8-slip expansion on the dry dock. The dry dock lease is in that little dashed area, and you can see the 8-slip expansion kind of extends out into an area near the fuel dock, which is kind of it's a turning basin of sorts. A lot of vessels maneuver in that area to tie up to the fuel dock. We get some large commercial vessels coming in, occasionally the Coast Guard cutter being one of them. So we took a look at that and thought, well, this may not be the best thing for navigability. So we looked at another option of a 4-slip expansion. There are 4 slips and 8 slips because we have double wide slips in Santa Barbara. So you either increase them by 4 or 8, and we want to continue with that. We like this option because it really doesn't change a whole lot from what was there before and what people were used to. Whenever you do these kind of analyses according to the state guidelines, you measure from the dock to another structure, not from a boat tied off to that dock to another structure. Nevertheless, it's difficult not to anticipate a boat tying off and what those impacts would be, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more in just a moment. So at this point, we kind of like the idea of a 4-slip expansion. Another issue that has come up is the end tie lease space. As I mentioned before, it was leased to the dry dock since about 1979, we believe. And in 2012, for a lot of different reasons, the dry dock went away. He ceased to operate. We removed the facility from the harbor. And fortunately, at that time, we had Clean Seas come at us and asked for some lease space for some of these fast attack oil spill response vessels. And that was in 2012, and it just so happened we leased it to them in the meantime, knowing that this issue would be resolved in a few years or be dealt with. There's 3 different options whenever you have an opportunity like this for this end tie. We can continue to use it as lease space. We can turn it into a transient slip. We do have demand for large berths for transients. And we can assign it off the slip waiting list. As we all know, we've had a slip waiting list in Santa Barbara Harbor for many years, and one of our goals is to try and get people off that waiting list. We consider several factors in analyzing a situation like this. One, ocean-dependent uses. As Brian mentioned in his report, according to the Harbor Master Plan, it's the highest priority for us when we consider lease spaces and other operations. Revenue, we're an enterprise fund. We try to generate revenue and operate like a business. The history of use, and the Corps of Engineers funding priorities, something I alluded to recently in my previous report about commercial operations. As far as ocean-dependent uses are concerned, Clean Seas Fast Attack Response Vessel is the epitome of an ocean-dependent use. They got to operate out of a harbor. They got to operate in the area where they're most effective. We have a lot of oil rigs right offshore, closer to Santa Barbara Harbor than anywhere else. They commissioned 3 of these vessels in 2012 and have been looking for berthing ever since. They requested 2 slips in Santa Barbara at the time. We couldn't accommodate them, but it just so happens with the dry dock going away, we could accommodate 1 slip. They are, we believe, are still interested in another slip up here. Revenue. This is a pretty straightforward analysis. We generate $2,200 a month in lease revenues. Transient berthing, if you rented it out every day of the month, is about $2,025. It's 90 cents a foot times 30 days. Not very many of our berths are rented out 30 days a month, but they're close. There's quite a bit of demand in Santa Barbara Harbor. Slip fees are pretty reasonable in Santa Barbara Harbor. Some might argue otherwise, but if it was just off the waiting list, the slip fee would generate about $953 a month for that berth. The history, once again, it's been a dry dock lease since the 1970s. Clean Seas has been leasing it since 2012. And by way of comparison, or a comparable example within the harbor is 4B end tie. And I believe it was 2009 we modified 4B end tie. We had two large vessels side tied to it, so it was a lease space for two vessels, and they had a really odd configuration, what we call dolphin piles, how they were tied up. We reconfigured it and had three vessels that kind of tie up in a Medmore fashion. So we expanded it by one. It had been used as a lease space. We expanded the operation and continued to use it as a lease space, generating maximum revenue and also accommodating a need for larger vessels in the harbor. In Corps of Engineers funding, as I mentioned previously, priority is given to commercial and emergency response operations. They've always been very pleased that we have the Coast Guard here, and although Clean Seas isn't a Coast Guard operation, that kind of emergency, but they do respond to other emergencies. God forbid we have an oil spill offshore. They're probably the most state-of-the-art operation that's anywhere on the West Coast right now. So having them in our backyard is definitely a feather in our cap and helps significantly with that. When you look at something like a Clean Seas lease superimposed on the four-slip expansion, the dry dock lease, and their lease, it just extends slightly beyond what the old dry dock lease was. So we kind of like how this fits. It maintains the area of navigability within that turning basin. And for that reason, we are recommending this evening that the Harbor Commission direct staff to reduce the F-finger expansion from 8 slips to 4 slips during Phase 7, and also to direct staff to continue to operate the end-tie at F-finger as a lease space. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I hope that kind of helped to explain our reasoning behind the recommendations this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Treiberg. Any questions? Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report. And what is the width of a Clean Seas boat?
The lease is 24 feet by 75 feet, and I believe the vessel is 22 and a half feet wide.
Mr. Sloan?
Did you look at doing the same thing there that we did at 4B end-tie and putting 2 of the Clean Seas there, stern in?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, we did not look at that. When we first designed the Marina One project, we were really looking at taking people off the waiting list, and it was an opportunity similar to P-Finger, where we expanded by another 4 slips. So we kind of didn't think of it at that time. 4B end-tie is an ideal location for the Clean Seas vessel, and they were actually there temporarily when one of the other vessels was gone, and I think we're leaning in that direction for future accommodation for those operations for the second vessel.
Okay. Any other? Carl, in a barely related question, you say that the construction will be done in 2018. Is this a 10-year, 15-year, or do we start again once we're done?
Chair Spicer, Marina One will have A through P fingers will have been replaced over the course of 9 years come 2018. Those docks should last 35, 40 years easily. The old docks did, and they weren't nearly of the same quality. Q, R, and S finger were installed in 1998, so I think we'll be having a similar conversation in 2028. Is that 30 years from then? We'll start thinking about that. And as you know, the Marinas 2 through 4, we rebuilt that with our own staff because they're wooden docks. So we're trying to keep up with the need for new docks in a couple different manners.
Thank you very much. Oh, Commissioner Power.
Thank you. I like the recommendation a lot, but is there any uncertainty that if we build this, that Clean Seas will somehow not take it?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, I spoke with Ike Eichert, Clean Seas, yesterday, just to confirm that they're still very interested in having 2 vessels berthed in Santa Barbara. That was their original plan, and they're certainly want to continue with that plan. Frequently, you'll see a vessel, one of their second vessels, rafted up against the one that's leasing F-Finger right now. And I told them it's going to be a few years before we get to F-Finger, but we're very excited to hear that might be a possibility.
Is there any backup plan just on the very remote chance that Clean Seas decides to move to Ventura or something? But I use that hypothetically, of course. I have no inside information. But
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, I'm sure there's such demand for larger vessels in our harbor, and the trend is towards larger vessels, that I don't think we'll have any problem leasing these spaces to Clean Seas or another industrial commercial operator.
Yeah. Thank you all. It's a good proposal. Thanks.
All right, well, if that's it with questions, we've taken care of A. I would entertain a motion for B, direct the staff to reduce F-finger expansion from 8 slips to 4 during Phase 7 of the project.
I'd move recommendations B and C.
I'll second that motion.
Very good. We've got a recommendation for both B and C. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? Recommendation passes. Thank you. Moving on to our last item, number 7, mooring program amendments. Jeanette, please.
Yes, item 7, mooring program amendments. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, receive a staff report on the status of the department's East Beach mooring program, and B, recommend City Council approval of changes to the program.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as you recall, the Waterfront Department, in concert with a lot of other agencies, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, and others, established a mooring program east of Stearns Wharf in 2006. The two primary purposes were to offer opportunity to individuals who were unable, let's say, to transfer into a slip in Santa Barbara Harbor, because obviously we're always fully subscribed in the harbor, and also hopefully to get folks out of the anchorage who are interested in getting on a mooring and having a permanent mooring out of there to reduce groundings on East Beach. I'd like to say it's been relatively successful on both fronts, but we'll discuss a couple of its shortfalls in a slide or two here. It includes 44 mooring sites east of the wharf, and the current number of active mooring permits is 22, and 22 are unassigned. So it's split right down the middle. We have 22 assigned and 22 unassigned. This is what the mooring area looks like unassigned. This, as you can see, the smaller circles toward the beach, smaller diameter circles are intended to accommodate smaller vessels moored there, and of course moving to the outside, much larger ones. This is what the occupation looks like right now. The ones that are dark are occupied by vessels that are part of the mooring permit program, with the exception of Mr. Clean, one of the Clean Seas oil response vessels in the lower right-hand corner, or it would be the southeast corner of the drawing here. And, of course, the Tidemar barge, which is the hatched one in the middle of the diagram on the right. That's a waste oil containment barge. In case of a huge oil spill, it'll hold 15,000 barrels of oil, or 600 gallons of waste oil. So it's indispensable to the oil response activities that Carl was describing in the previous report. But you can see the rest of it scattered. The double-hatched ones on the left are ones we've taken out of the program because there were seafloor debris and entanglement discovered during the mooring of vessels there. So otherwise, what you see here is the 22 vessels that are occupying mooring spaces with permits right now. So per the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, when the number of permittees declines to per City Council resolution, when the number of permittees decline to 30 or fewer, the waterfront may hold a lottery for vacant sites. And we've taken advantage of that opportunity, continually trying to encourage occupancy and utilization of the mooring area. So we've had 5 lotteries spread between 2006 and 2013. And the last 3 lotteries were really the tell here, if you will. They attracted a total of 122 participants. You'd think that would fill the mooring area, right? But only 12 of them proved up. That's a 1% prove-up rate. And what we call proving up is it's a term of art we use to indicate that somebody has gone through the lottery process, been offered a mooring permit, contracted for the deployment of mooring gear, put a boat on the mooring, registered that boat with the department, and received a mooring permit. And that 1% rate is not acceptable. And here it is graphically, well, not graphically, but in a table anyway, showing you the number of participants in each of the last 3 lotteries and the number of prove-ups. Needless to say, and I'm going to go back to that for a sec, needless to say, this consumes a lot of time. For the ROI, as they would say, is not good, the return on our investment here, especially in terms of staff time and going and commissions time, going through the lotteries and pulling all the names out of the hat only to have this number of people prove up. I don't want to embarrass her, but Jeanette has been at the heart of this whole thing, and it's used a whole heck of a lot of her time. She's done a terrific job, but in the end, it's not been as productive as we had hoped. In the meantime, we typically, occasionally, should I say, receive unsolicited requests for mooring permit assignments, but we can't accommodate these requests because we're duty-bound per city policy, which I believe is attachment 2 to your report, that requires the lotteries. And so, as you may recall, Commissioner Kelly, just before he retired from the commission, if you will, suggested we might want to move to a first-come, first-served approach instead of a lottery approach. And we believe the time has come to shift gears and move to that approach. I have a couple of people that we know of that are standing by and ready to tomorrow, if you offered them the opportunity to prove up with a mooring, they would do it. So what would be the upside to this? Well, again, it would enhance staff's ability to issue permits. As I mentioned, it would save the money spent on advertising and communication with key lottery participants, not to mention the staff time I just mentioned, just discussed. And so we see a lot of upside and very little downside to this proposed change. So what we're here to do tonight is to ask you to approve recommended policy parameters for shifting gears from a lottery model to a first-come, first-served model, and give us the authority to move forward to City Council with amendments to the current resolution that would enable us to make this change. Okay, and the proposed parameters we're asking you to support for us tonight include eliminating the lotteries, processing applications on first-come, first-served basis. We intend to charge a $300 non-refundable fee. This would be earnest money, $250 of it, which is equivalent to the annual fee charged for a mooring permit, would be applied for those who proved up, would be applied to their first annual permit. So really, for the serious folks, it would be simply a $50 application fee for the staff time that is taken to process it. It's very modest indeed. And then once the list gets close to full, and we probably draw a number right around 35. Once we have 35 people on the I apologize. Once the mooring field gets a lot more full, around 35 permits issued, we would establish a waiting list, and we would articulate this in the resolution, a defined number, at which point we would establish a waiting list in anticipation of complete subscription to the mooring field and people coming in when they're all 44 are filled and saying, I want a mooring. So we would anticipate in the first-come, first-served world, ultimately a waiting list being established. All prove-ups, if you will, would be required to occur between May 1st and September 1st. That's for a couple of reasons. Number one, that's the established season of inspection that we have now. It's in the resolution. You can find it there. This does a couple of things. Number one, it makes sure that moorings are examined annually, inspected annually before winter season. Hope we get a winter season here. And it also syncs up with the schedules of the approved mooring contractors, so they're not getting random inspection requests all year, so they can dedicate some time in their calendars to this window period of actually it's September and October that the inspections occur. But if you have prove-ups required between May 1st and September 1st, what that does is in September 1st you get a year. In May 1st you get a year plus a few months, and your first prove-up is good for 15 months. It's sort of a bonus. It's like our parking permits. You get one in December, it's good for 13 months. You get a mooring permit in May, it's good for about 13 or 14 months, okay? That gives folks an initial mooring year is brand new, so there's the contractors have expressed very little concern with that. That's also parallel with what's expressed in the current resolution that's in your packets. And so these would be the primary cornerstones of the new program. All of that would be contained in changes to the resolution that you have in your packet. except for one item. And this is the only one we found. I can't promise you it's the only one, but we're going to search the municipal code again and again with a comb to see if there are any others. But there's a very minor reference to the mooring permit administration that talks about, and this is the administration of the mooring permits. There's a lot of talk about moorings and if they drift off and having to put them back on, and the responsibilities of the mooring permittees, which would not change. But what would change would be the procedures for conducting lotteries, the reference to the mooring policy. We might have to change the language in this, which would probably require a trip to the ordinance committee, as minor as that is. But what we're asking you tonight is to give us the leeway to go ahead and do both of these at the same time, hoping that we can expedite the process so that we can begin offering mooring permit applications to people who come to the counter and ask for them sooner rather than later. So in conclusion, with your approval, we would draft amendments to the resolution and to the municipal code where required, and we hope to have it for City Council consideration in early 2015. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cronman. Before we entertain questions, I believe Mr. Easley is asked to speak on this matter. Please approach.
Hi, I'm Danny Easley. I have a vessel in the anchorage I've had for 4 years. And, we have the summer anchorage, we have the winter anchorage. Each time I have to pull my anchor and then try and reset it without knowing, for sure if my anchor's secure. So you put another 200 feet of chain on, right, to try and keep it down because you don't want to lose your boat. And when it comes time to take a sail, you got to pull up 250 feet of chain out of the sand to go sailing. By that time, you don't want to go sailing. So, and then, every winter, it's the worry about, there's a storm coming. You're constantly watching the weather. I can't put my own mooring down because I can't, right? You're not allowed to, or I would have already done it. So I think this is, I've been trying to, get into a mooring spot, like I said, for 4 years. And so I think this is a really good idea because, with the lottery, I've been unable to, achieve what I'm trying to do, which is find a secure anchorage for my vessel. So I'm all for it. The fees and, having it inspected is great with me because I want a secure mooring place to, keep my boat. So that's all. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Cronman? Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, I've been curious why only 2% or whatever it is proved up. What were the reasons for this?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Kramer, and I apologize, follow my sword here. I was just corrected on my math. It's 10%, not 1%. But I assume the question remains. I believe we've talked about this a lot. Jeanette and I have discussed it a lot because Jeanette and I work together as partners on this program. It appears to be that people either have, and this includes people who even paid the $50 application fee. They get right to the point of proving up and they tend to change their minds. It's not for everybody. And I think, the idea of having a 360-degree ocean view and, a little chunk of the paradise to yourself sounds good on paper, but you have to be willing to pay for the installation of your equipment and have it inspected every year. It's $3,000 to $5,000 to install. It's usually $500 to $800 to inspect it and replace parts of it, typically the dip section, annually. So I think the idea sounds good at first to some folks, but I think as they consider it more closely, as they scrutinize the costs and whether they really want to do it and where their boat is and what have you, I think the bloom comes off the rose for some folks. Interestingly, the 22 people we have out there are solid folks. Some of them have been out there since the inception of the program, and they love it out there. And so we're hoping that by having first come, first serve, we'll have the people who really want to be out there and aren't speculating on a fantasy, if you will.
Why wouldn't those people who really want to be out there have gone through the lottery process? I mean, I'm just curious.
I would only. Why would?
Why would they have not gone through the lottery process and been at some level on the lottery?
In other words, what was their interest level in getting into the...
Why would there be more people now as opposed to the way it has been?
Commissioner Kramer, we've occasionally had a consistent, although only occasionally, smattering of individuals like Danny, I believe his name is, who spoke to you a moment ago, who come to the counter who we've been unable to accommodate because of the way we established the lottery system. We established it, and you can see by the numbers of folks who enter the lottery, we established it with great expectations that this would be a slam dunk to fill it. It just hasn't been proved that it hasn't proven out that way, and we think it's time to shift courses.
I think it makes a great deal of sense to shift. I mean, having done the lottery here for 3 or 4 times, it's disappointing that it hasn't worked out for people. Thank you.
Maybe it will eventually.
Any other questions? Commissioner Sloan?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions on the rules here. So if someone pays the $300 non-refundable application fee and does not prove up, then they forfeit the $300 fee. And okay. And then if you're on the waiting list and you decline it, can you go back on the waiting list by paying an additional $300 fee? Or how would that work?
The way Commissioner Sloan, the way we intend to describe it is, if you get offered a position, if you're on the waiting list and you get offered an opportunity to establish a mooring and prove up, and you decline, you'd be off the list. It gets to be quite a challenge, a management challenge, if you will, to waitlist management as a whole. There should be a degree in it at college. Waitlist management isn't easy, but so that would be our intention.
But the $300, you would forfeit it if you cannot prove up, correct?
That's correct. And we would also probably apply a $40 a year charge, which we'll articulate in the amended resolution for staying on the waiting list, just like we do with people on the slip waiting list.
Okay. And then just for everybody in the audience and here and on TV, could you just walk through just briefly what proving up means?
Sure. When you're offered a mooring permit, let's say you've succeeded in whatever the process is and you're offered a mooring permit, you have to, quote unquote, prove up. Well, the first thing you have to do is establish a mooring on a given site that you've discussed with the Waterfront Department in that drawing that I showed you. Proving up starts with getting a mooring and establishing it on one of those sites. We have a number, I think it's 3 or 4 of contractors who, through a request for qualifications process, the city selected as the qualified individuals with whom prospective applicants can work to have a mooring established. Now, most folks don't have a mooring and chain and ground tackle, all that laying around in their side yard. So typically what folks do is they contact one of the contractors, they shop, they're certainly free to shop among contractors, and they ask what the turnkey cost is to have a mooring established, deployed. And so once they come to that agreement and the mooring is deployed, then they have to have a vessel registered to that mooring. And so they get a vessel, they have a certain amount of time to do that, and they register. They have to at least tie it up to the mooring one time. After that, there's no use it or lose it clause. And then once that's done, they come to the accommodation dock, and just like issuing a slip permit, we measure the boat, we photograph the boat, we put a mooring sticker on it, and they are an official mooring permittee. That is proving up.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Mick, can you put that slide back up that shows specifically what you're asking the recommendation for? Okay. Commissioner Webb, did you have a comment?
I did. I also think it's a good idea to not have it on a lottery. But what's the difference in the price between a $3,000 and a $5,000 installation? Is it the size of the vessel or the contractor?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, great question and fair question. It's both. It's smaller vessels require less chain per the ground tackle specifications. I think we have a 5-to-1 ratio on the road on the the chain to depth ratio. So less chain, less cost. Smaller boat, less chain, and also price shopping and contractor availability and all of that can play into it. But I hope that answers your question. Those are the two primary reasons.
Yeah, thank you. And how many nautical miles is the mooring from the harbor? What are people's commute?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, I want to say it's about one point. Yeah, it's about a mile. It's in the vicinity of a mile, maybe a shade less for boats that are in the center of the mooring area.
Yeah, winter anchorage seems really far. That's way out there.
Yeah, it's east of the mooring area. Yeah.
Commissioner Power.
I think it's a good proposal. Thanks for thinking it through. One question to help me to understand the timing involved for someone wanting a mooring spot. Can a person go on the waiting list at any time with the new plan?
As conceived, and we have to put this into the resolution, the waiting list would only begin once we hit a certain threshold of assigned spaces. And so, yes, a person could get on the waiting list at any time, but the way we're conceiving as we're going to amend the resolution is that we would put a ceiling on the number of people that the waiting list would contain. We don't want to have an endless waiting list because, as we've learned with slip waiting lists, it creates false expectations that can never be realized and people paying every year on a fantasy, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay, given that, let's say someone puts their name on the waiting list in October after the close of the proving up period. You would accept their proving up sometime in the 5-month period, May to September 1, I would assume. So they essentially would have to wait that long before they could even prove up, as it were, and be without a slip if they wanted one, being without a mooring site for, let's say, October through May, June, whatever it would be.
That's correct. Let's say hypothetically that an individual was on the they were number one on the waiting list. It's going to take us 30 spaces just to have a waiting list, to activate it. But let's say there was a waiting list and the person was number one on the waiting list and their name came up, and it came up in February. Yes, they could complete all the paperwork. But they would, yes, you're absolutely right. They would have to wait several months to actually prove up. And that window is really important for the consistency of the program, the pre-winter thing, and working with the contractors who do the deployments.
I do understand the logic of waiting for the contractor to inspect all, but I just wanted to think of what would be the worst-case scenario for someone who is desperate to get into the mooring.
They'd have to wait a few months as opposed to several years and have their name selected, luckily, in a lottery and then wind all the way down through the lottery till finally got to the person who, because we don't do these lotteries. First come, first serve as people come to the counter. Lotteries we do on a very irregular basis. Sure.
Questions? Okay. Mr. Croman, has the mooring area been full in the last 10 years?
Mr. Chair, no. Okay. And to answer your question, the recommendation, I apologize, isn't on the slide, but Jeanette can repeat it for you.
No, I've got it here. I just wanted it out there for the audience and television. And then why, and you said 35 would be a number where we'd start the waiting list again. Why bother with a waiting list? Why doesn't it just first come, first serve if we've never had capacity? And maybe I'm being too simple.
No, it's an entirely reasonable question and one for consideration here and now if you'd like. But if we never have, if this proves to be as popular as we think it is, or we think it might be over time, we thought it not unwise to include a contingency for when it's full. Because if there's no contingency for when it's full, we're just turning people away without, a real mechanism for telling them, hey, here's an opportunity when it does come up. As opposed to if I got turned away and I go away and then somebody drops out of the mooring program, the opportunity doesn't go to somebody on the waiting list. It goes to the first person who happens to come up to the counter.
Very fair. All right. Any other questions for Mr. Croman? Thank you, Mick. I believe we have a recommendation. Jeanette, would you mind reading the recommendation? Please.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, receive a staff report on the status of the East Beach mooring program, and B, recommend City Council approval of changes to the program.
I think what he's referring
is
Oh. Okay, can I just,
Sorry, Jeanette.
okay, that's okay.
Without my notes.
Okay. Okay, staff therefore recommends the following changes to the mooring program. Eliminate mooring lotteries, process mooring applications on a first-come, first-served basis, require a $300 non-refundable application fee, $250 of which would be applied to initial annual permit fee following prove-up, establish a mooring permit waiting list to be used if and when the mooring area achieves full occupancy, $40 per year to remain on the list, same as the slip permit waiting list. And if the mooring permit offered and declined, applicant drops off the list. All prove-ups to occur between May 1st and September 30th. Per amended Section 3.3 of Resolution 12-014, syncs with commitment from contractors based on their schedules and efforts to not install or inspect moorings during the winter, which should be approved prior to winter.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So we have that in front of us. I would entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve recommendation B. Recommend City Council approve changes to the program. I guess that involves staff actually drafting some changes to the resolution.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Very good. We've got a.
I have
Oh, wait.
a comment.
Before we vote.
So on this recommendation, so would we get a chance to see that language before it goes to City Council, or does it just get?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, per the recommendation, it would go straight to City Council. If you would like to see the changes, I'd be more than happy to come back to you with them. My interest in going to City Council, straight to City Council with a new amended resolution, was to try and expedite the program, but I'm certainly open to if Harbor Commission wants to see those changes.
I'm good with that. Thanks.
Okay, we have a first and a second, so we will take a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cronman. Any staff communication?
Mr. Chair, just a couple of things. You might have heard that a 30-foot sailboat washed ashore on Tuesday in front of the volleyball courts down by the bathhouse, the East Beach Bathhouse. Started breaking up in the surf line. As of this morning or this afternoon at the low tide, Marburg removed that vessel from the beach at the expense of the owner, the vessel's owner. So we didn't have to get in the middle of that one, and it's gone as of today. The other thing I wanted to point out, as usual, we will likely not be having a December meeting just due to vacation schedules and the busyness around the holidays. And in addition to that, the January meeting will likely be a week postponed. Once again, I have a CMANC meeting, this time in Long Beach, on that third week. And so we'd be looking at January 22nd, most likely, for the meeting. That's not written in stone just yet, but that's how the CMANC meeting falls. And so if I do end up registering and going, that we would probably postpone the meeting a week. So January 22nd would be the day.
Very good. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, unless anyone has any final comments, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
One.
Second.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Have a very good evening. Thank you, everyone who showed up.